here?
We got an hour.
Yeah, now, okay. So we're going to move eventually a little bit, but this kind of changed a little bit from what I think we initially talked about of just doing a session together, but that's so we could get all the concepts and the nuts and bolts out and make sure that we're all on the same page. So, what Evan asked me to do is basically, and kind of parlaying on my time out here in training, when I was doing the fitness programming and then as training captain, continue to do that, and kind of the way I would set up a session and how that can relate into how we may do it for our crews or clientele, if you will, and just kind of how you can connect the dots. Now, this goes in a much greater detail on that module that I guess is going to be online, right?
Yep.
And so I'll just kind of cover the basics, and then this is meant to be like a sharing thing. Like we're going to create together like an average day, and then how that may pair with the next day at the station, and how they may pair with 1 or 2 or 3 days on your days off to create a program. Does that make sense? But one thing that we did in recruit school that Evan wanted me to kind of touch on, and after some things that were said yesterday, I had some thoughts, was we started every day with the mindset thing. And I think that's pretty important because you should have a purpose to why you're training. Now, that could be anything, and all of us have slightly different reasons. But there is one reason that kind of ties us all together. It ties us together with our future clientele, aka other members of the department, and that's what we do, period, as professional structural firefighters. And so I think what Evan said yesterday was awesome. He shared with us a couple of stories that were awesome, and I appreciate you sharing that, but about why he was here in the first place. And I think sometimes, especially with some of our older members that may be deconditioned now, there's a reason they got into this job, and we have to tap into that. Because if we don't, and I think part of that should be intrinsic, right? Hopefully, but obviously that kind of wanes, and for all of us at different times and at different levels. It also should come from our leadership, but that doesn't always happen. And then now, I think we're filling that role. And kind of like Rich said yesterday, there's a bunch of great people in this training and in the room, and future leaders of our department. And so we're gonna play a large part in this role when it comes to getting people healthy and the mindset, because what Evan alluded to yesterday is that we're going to kind of become basically mental peer coordinator, kind of a thing on many levels. And I've been doing strength training and personal training for a long time, and if you haven't done it before, get ready to basically become a therapist on some level, and Paul knows what I'm talking about. But people open up to you, and through strength and through getting more fit, they feel very vulnerable at times, but they also feel very empowered, and they come a long way mentally, perhaps more so than physically, which is really fucking cool, to be honest. But we have to tie that back into the purpose of why we're all here. And if you can tap back into, talk to a guy who has 20 years on the job and well, tell me about why you got it. Maybe before you do anything else, tell me about why you became a firefighter. And then that's going to tap back into, maybe giving a little, because you're only going to inspire them or motivate them for this long, right? We need to tap into something intrinsic, and there has to be a bigger purpose there. And there's a lot of ways to do that, and it's easier to do with recruits, to be honest, than it is with your crew without sounding cheesy. Like we talked about yesterday, hey, how did that call make us all feel? Who says that? Because then you're just going to get shit thrown at you, right? But on some level, it is possible, and you can do it. And you can do it from the back seat. You can do it from the back seat, or you can do it from the front, honestly. And so I think so. I just wanted to touch on that again, because without this, none of this matters, and none of this will continue, and none of this will be consistent. So therefore, then it doesn't matter again. So we have to tap into this. And so how you do that, we can all brainstorm at another time. Sounds like we're going to go into that at other times, and there'll be some online platforms regarding around that. But I don't know, the way I kind of bring it up with my crew, with the recruits, like I said, it's easy. You just kind of you motivate them through why are you here, and why do you want to stay here, and why did you ever do this in the first place. But for somebody who's already in the job and with your crew, when there's a lot of sarcasm going on, sometimes it's bringing up a kid that said something about your crew that was on the family the call you went on, or in the parade that saw you. It's what do you want that kid to see? What guy do you want to be, or what firefighter? I can't say guy. What firefighter do you want to be? And then, I don't know, I think on some level that's going to intrinsically motivate all of us, I hope. And if not, then, maybe it's time to not do this anymore, but I think the vast majority of us are still want to be here. And so anyway, that's kind of my soapbox on that. But I think my point is we play a larger role in that maybe than you think. And it doesn't matter how much time you have on the job, you can play a huge role in that. You really can. And sometimes that's even just through your actions at the station too, Now, another mindset thing is perception, and Evan and I talked about this yesterday, so I feel like I wanted to bring it up a little bit, because we yesterday, and a lot of this training that we're going to get online too, we talk about stress a lot. And I think stress is it can be perceived in one of multiple ways. I mean, if anything, we could have all been like basically scared driving home, like, oh my God, I'm sleep deprived, I've got stress from all these calls, I've got this and this, like, how am I even alive right now? And that's a wrong mindset to have. And so if you think, so there's good stress, right? And then there's other stress that's not so good. But the majority of the stress that we're talking about can be perceived in multiple ways, and they can either be seen as a stress or an opportunity or a tool, right? Because this is all stress to our body, but it's good, right? Because it's making us stronger. And you can think of and then all the calls that we keep mentioning, 2s and 7s and 1s and 8s, those are all calls that add stress. However, okay, let's go back to this. At one point in time, all of us couldn't wait to go on a call. We were a writer, and we could not wait to go on a call. Okay. So now we're like, oh, fucking call, and that's stress, and it's weighing us down. It shouldn't weigh us down. It should be an opportunity to do what you signed up to do. It should be an opportunity to show your skills. It should be an opportunity to be a sheepdog in the community, which we all signed up to do. So I think perception of stress is huge and bigger than maybe most. Now, I think we need to understand all this stuff, right? All this stress. We need to understand these things are happening to us, and then be empowered to take better care of ourselves because these things are happening to us. However, every stress that we put on ourselves can either be an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to show our skills, an opportunity to make us stronger, or they can just keep chipping you away, and then that's when PTSD happens, and that's when burnout happens, and all that. So we all have a choice on how we react to that. Does that make sense? So I just wanted to touch on, because I think this is going to play a much larger role, and you can basically put a big line here. This is going to play a much larger role with our role within the department and our members than we give credit to. And then when you get them here and you get them thinking about their purpose and then changing their perception a little bit, all this is going to be, this is nothing. This is cake. This is just getting the snowball rolling, you know what I mean? And then everything starts to happen for them. And then it's kind of like a vicious cycle in a good way. These things feed off of each other. But if you don't get this buy-in, you know what I mean? Like then this becomes stress for them, because now you're the guy who's coming in who, as Chief Petnerick said, is already fit, and this is easy for you. You love squatting, I hate squatting. When you put a bar on my back, that's stress. It's like, no, this isn't stress. This is good, and you're going to feel empowered by this. Just give me some time, and remember why we're here, and give me a little time, and I promise, So anyway, so that's why I wanted to talk about mindset first, and because what we did in recruit school a lot is we put quotes on the board, and to get that mindset going. And quotes in the social media realm are highly overrated, and sometimes, but if you really just look at one at a time, and really in a group and get the mindset going, I think they're pretty awesome. But for crews, it's going to be a little different, and that's kind of why I want to talk about that stuff. So now let's get into the nuts and bolts of creating an average session, if you will. And so I'm going to touch on what Evan and Paul touched on, and I touch on what Jake touched on, and then some stuff that I talk about in the module that'll be online, and try to bring it all together in a relatively short period of time. And then, like I said, we'll brainstorm on what that session could turn out to be and what these things. So we're basically kind of matching this, which if you remember what Jake talked about. So an average session, we start with a warm-up, and that'll include some sort of general warm-up. We'll talk about that, movement prep, and then what Jake referred to as CNS, which is a pretty popular term, on getting the system a little bit more fired up based on your goal or your movement prep for that day. And then what he talked about is kind of training. So there's your energy systems, right? And they can kind of be loosely correlated with your average session as to what you're training for. So if applicable, and these don't necessarily all have to go for every individual in every session, right? But if applicable, and if Like if you were a professional athlete, this may take 2 hours, and you would set it up just this way. Now we have to pick and choose based on priorities. But in general, warm up your power-based movement. So that's Oli lifts and plyos, which for a lot of our members, we're not even going to touch. Maybe not. We'll see. So where would power fall into our energy systems? ATP, perfect. Okay, and so what are we talking about here with repetitions?
3 to 5.
Or less, probably 1 to 3, really. Right? What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say singles.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So what we're talking about, snatch and clean and jerk are the classic Oli lifts. How many people in the job are gonna do snatch and clean and jerk? The full movements. Yeah, 1% or less, I think. Now, power clean, you can include that in there. Power snatch, snatch high pull. Those kinds of things. You could apply those there, and I think some of those are really good. Again, know your population and know your client a little bit. Plyos, sometimes they're overdone. They can also be very, very good, but again, know your clientele. They can also be a lot more impactful in the body than you give credit to. But regardless, these movements, they're going to generally fall into the ATP. They're generally going to be like 5 sets of 1 or 3 sets of 3 or somewhere in that realm, and that can be all over the place. You gonna say something?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that the jump test is
perfect.
Testing that ability right there. And we can try to apply these as we go to that assessment, the WFI, that we're following with the WFI.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I should have wrote that up here too, just to tie it all together. So then the next in your session, for some people, this will be omitted. So you go warm up into strength. And so what Jake referred to as core movements. So what are we talking about here?
Squat, press, lunge.
There you go. So your squat, your deadlift, your bench press, your overhead press, maybe a big row, something like that, whatever the focus is of the day. So that now we're tying in our session makeup with our energy systems with these major movements. Now, so there's a lot of ways to recategorize these, but this is a good way that Dan John talks about to keep every session and every week pretty simple. You got your squat, your hinge, your push, your pull, your carry, and then what we're going to go into that's often overlooked, but I think really important for structural firefighters is what he refers to as groundwork. You could call it mobility work, you could call it quadruped work, is that what you call it? And so there's a lot of ways to refer to that, and we'll do that some hands-on later. But basically what we want to do is tie all these in together. So, but the key to remember is these movements, especially these top 4, can they fall into any of these energy systems, or only some?
I would say at least mostly the top 2, yeah.
Yeah, I think so, right? Take a hinge. A kettlebell swing is a hinge, right? If you do a bunch of volume in kettlebell swings, that becomes aerobic, at some point in time. But you're right, probably the top 3. Carries can kind of come in all of these, except maybe these, right? So they're kind of mixed and matched here. And then can all these fall in any of these pretty much? Right? So you could do a hinge with like we refer to as power clean. That could be done in a power kind of format. In strength, it could be a deadlift. And accessory hypertrophy, it could be a Romanian deadlift or a stiff-legged deadlift or something like that. And in a Metcon kind of fashion or conditioning fashion, it could be a kettlebell swing. So all these moves. So what I'm trying, hopefully I'm not confusing you. I'm trying to simplify everything. I'm trying to just say, here's the major movements. Here's our energy systems. Here's our average thing. And how can we mix and match them? And the answer is it's infinite. Unfortunately, like I wish there was like a And again, Paul knows what I'm talking about here. But it'd be cool if there was just like, we'll just do this. Go. But that's the beauty of it is you have to prioritize it based on the individual and what are their needs. So anyway, let's get back into where we were here. So strength, if we had to match it, so we realized we can match it with almost any of those major movement patterns. What are we looking at as far as our energy system when it comes to strength or our core movements?
Top 2.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And that's kind of what Paul was referring to as ATP kind of bleeds into CP, but it extends it a little bit, that creatine phosphase kind of cycle. And now what are we talking about as far as repetitions in general for most people?
1 to 5.
Mm-hmm. Maybe even upwards of 6 or 7, depending on the individual. But yeah, I would say 3 to 5 would be a good ballpark there, 3 to 6. and then sets would be independent or individual rather. Some people can handle 5x5s, a lot can't. Some guys may have to work up to a top set of 5, and then they get into the other stuff because that's just a lot for their system. But so that's where the kind of the strength comes in. So when I say strength, I mean like absolute strength, that we're training for strength. Now, before we go too much deeper, let's go into what Evan wanted to make sure that we all understand, what he referred to yesterday a little bit, what rest periods, based on your priorities and your goals. What are the rest periods? And these two are kind of have that in common. What are rest periods with those two? Longer, right? Because the point is power, and the point is gaining absolute strength, which requires full recovery. And as these guys referred to yesterday, it's almost painful for some of us to do that, like to literally, and for others it's fun, but to literally like sit around. I mean, there's some strength coaches that say 10 minutes after a heavy set of 5 squats, and if you're really there, like if you're at an RPE, and we'll go into RPE in a minute, if you're at an RPE of 9 or 10 on a set of 5 to 7 squats, you need 10 minutes, but otherwise you're reducing the weight on the bar. So it takes time, and strength takes time, and so if strength is their priority, which we're all kind of on the same page that it should be, depending on the individual, that may be hard to get buy-in, believe it or not. For others, it may be like, oh, it's awesome, I get to rest that long, we're not doing CrossFit, or, but I think it's important, and you have to give it time. At a minimum, I would say 2 to 3 minutes. You're probably looking more like 3 to 5, especially once you get more trained and you're actually, those loads are actually nearing your training, where the training load should be, if that makes sense. Like an undertrained or a new client that's new to this, and they don't really know what they're capable of, nor does their body really, so they may be able to get away with shorter rest times, even with strength, and they'll still gain strength. But as you get more trained, it's probably going to take more time, because those loads are going to get towards your higher RPEs and your higher percentage of your 1 rep max a lot quicker. So anyway, you need that time. So now moving on down the line here, I can't remember exactly what Jake referred to here, but I would refer to it as accessory, you could say assistance, which they are different, and or hypertrophy would be kind of the next on the line. Now, what could all of those movement patterns fall into this category? I think so, for sure. Depending on how you loaded it, maybe take ground workout, maybe. For some people, groundwork could even fall in there. But yeah, you could squat for repetitions. You could do goblet squats. You could do front squats. You could do belt squats. Again, we refer, kettlebell swings or RDLs would fall in here for a hinge, a push. I mean, that's infinite. Overhead presses, horizontal presses, push-ups, whatever. A pull-ups, lat pull-downs, different kinds of rows. That would all fall in here. And so again, this may or may not be there depending on the individual, but I think for most of us, probably at least a little bit should be there, and that's kind of building that body armor, that building the connective tissue that Paul talked about, and just hypertrophy in general. Not everybody needs it, but a lot do. And in general, a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, in general. That's a big generalization, but probably an aspect of that should be in all of our training in some level. It doesn't have to be at the station, maybe not, but it's a good way to bring the crew together, to be honest. Everybody loves getting a pump sometimes, especially once you've done it a little bit. So where does this fall into our energy systems?
Falling into black hole.
Yeah, and Evan wanted to keep this pretty basic. So and Paul kind of was going to go into the differences, but I think the goal was to keep it real basic. So yeah, it kind of falls in that general category. So we're looking at what for like timing and or repetitions in this realm.
8 to 12 reps.
Yeah. So that could be as little as 8, as many as 20, depending on the person. But yeah, the general rule of thumb is 8 to 12, I'd say. But again, and they're finding out a lot more about hypertrophy in recent studies, that it's very different for different people. Some people can gain hypertrophy at as little as 5 reps, or even doing strength work, and some can gain it up to 30 reps. But if you had to just kind of generalize it at 8 to 12, 8 to 15, something like that. And then in time under tension, so if you put a time scale to it, and that would kind of get us into that glycolytic realm, you're looking at 20 to 60 seconds, or more, a little bit more, but for a realistic hypertrophy set, that's kind of what you're looking at there. So a little bit more time under the bar, if you will, or with weight in hand or whatever you're doing. Okay, moving on down, and these can almost be in the same category depending on how you set it up, but metabolic conditioning. So there's a big gray area here, depending on the individual and depending on the way you set it up, in my opinion. So what would be metabolic conditioning, and why would we do it, and how could you set that up?
What would be some exercise examples,
Yeah.
or what energy system?
Both.
Sprints.
Glycolytic, some ATP, and I think the point of metabolic conditioning is to increase our lactic threshold, and that could be any of these exercises: low rest, high frequency.
Yeah. So yeah, you can mix and match almost anything and turn it into metabolic conditioning. So the load is typically lighter, right? So your intensity is less from a perspective of load, not intensity as in how hard it is. And then, but your volume is probably higher. And then, good point in the rest period, which I forgot to mention up here, a little less rest periods here, like 30 to 90 seconds here. It could be zero rest here because, again, what is the goal? So you don't want to load too heavy, but the form still needs to be good, and that's the tricky part. And that's where sometimes CrossFit gets a bad rap is, sometimes they deter times on the clock for form, which, a good CrossFit coach wouldn't let happen, but it happens. Just like people do crappy form when they squat heavy too, same thing. So yeah, that's the key here is knowing what you're training. Now you can still use the major movements. You don't have to overanalyze it. You can still mix and match. This could be a triple set of something, and it could almost be borderline bodybuilding. I mean, if you do 3 sets, like a set of 10, a set of 10 of this, set of 10 of this with little to no rest, and then rest maybe 30 seconds and do it again. I don't know about you, but my heart rate's up, I'm sweating, and you could call it bodybuilding or you could call it metabolic conditioning, but it's a huge gray area, in my opinion now, and it all depends on your goals and what you need out of it. And then how much rest you would do is based on what you need more out of it, more hypertrophy or more conditioning. So that's where that gray area kind of blends. So yeah, so we're still kind of in glycolytic. And then now, what about conditioning, or you could call it cardio? What about that? Where are we in what energy system? Fairly obvious now, but
Now we're getting into aerobic.
Aerobic, perfect. And so what could that look like as far as what you could prescribe for somebody?
This could be as simple as the bike.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, depends on the person. It could be something super simple, low impact, or it could be something super hardcore, like let's go do prowler pushes, and that falls into here a little bit too. Like you can see where this gray area is coming in. So we're trying to simplify it and not get too black and white with the zones or with the energy systems or whatever, because ultimately it doesn't really matter as long as you have some aspect and understand the differences in how your body functions, and we'll kind of talk about that in relation to nutrition as well, but also as to what do we need out of it, and what is the member that you're working with, your client, if you will, what do they need out of it? Are they a super strong dude and we just need to maintain their strength, but man, their conditioning sucks and they're bleeding down bottles super fast and they cannot recover, so they're never going to a second bottle, then maybe we need to, so that's where your priorities come in. Maybe we need to go there, and I'm not saying go there first, but maybe we need to emphasize that versus somebody else who really needs to gain strength, really needs to gain stability, but you still touch on this through something low impact like the bike or whatever. But so you can see that, and again, I'm trying to simplify it and not to, but I just wanted to show you all the possibilities and how these three things kind of interlink, and even with if you want, you could put another column here with the FMS or the WFI movement analysis and how they all interplay. And so that's how you can see what somebody needs based on their peak results, based on the results that we get out of them, and then you can prioritize. But in general, this is kind of the setup you want to have depending on their priorities. But let's do two polarizing examples. Let's take the strong guy who's poorly conditioned. Now, does it mean we're going to omit these things? No, because we don't want them to lose strength. Now, if they lose a little, maybe are we okay? Maybe we're okay with them losing 10% of their strength. If they could deadlift 800 pounds, let's say, we're okay with a 720-pound deadlift if we can improve their conditioning as a structural firefighter, right? I mean, at some point in time, there's a limit to how strong you need to be. I think Matt Winning talks about, a 2.5 times body weight squat and deadlift or something like that, 1.5 times bench or something.
Yeah,
He
something like that.
Yeah, he has some standards, and he thinks
2.5 for squat and 3 times for.
yeah, and those are high. I mean, do the math. Those are high, and he thinks they're that high even without taking away your conditioning. You can get to that level. So I mean, there's a big room for a lot of strength. But you take an 800-pound deadlifter, we're there, right? I mean, for the most part.
I think it's also important to note that he has never been a firefighter, so he doesn't understand
and he's been a powerlifter.
the nature of recovery in our job. So to that point, real quick, I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
When we're approaching training with somebody that's just getting into it, the reason aerobic, that system is so important is because it helps us recover quicker.
Right.
So I'm not a big cardio guy, but I love the strength work. But if we can build up those mitochondria, if we can adapt our bodies to recover faster, we can improve in strength and power even that much faster.
Yeah, and that's a good note. So something I wanted to touch on as well today is as you kind of move down this in general, with taking this out of it for now, it takes a little more time and or maybe genetics from at the top of the list versus as you move down lower in general. I mean, you can get into like muscle fiber types per person and all that kind of stuff. We don't even talk about that. But in general, the person can get conditioned relatively quicker than they can get stronger in general. You're always going to have those anomalies, right? But as far as aerobically, I say that so you can let your clients know that as well, that if they're frustrated by and their strength gains come so slow, or they're barely adding anything to the bar, or even moving up a set of dumbbells is really, really challenging. You just have to coach them through that. It takes time. So just keep putting in the quality work, the good range of motion, the quality repetitions, and it's okay. Sometimes you have to check your ego there. In general, conditioning, something that felt like crap 2 weeks ago, you could do relatively a lot better. Again, when you put it all in scale there. But what's so important about conditioning is exactly that. And again, touching on Matt Winning's stuff, since he does work with tactical populations a lot, is one of his big sayings is, it's not what you can do, it's what you can recover from. And I think there's a lot of importance to that, because we can all ultimately, well, not all, but I mean most of us can do our job when it's hitting the fan, because your adrenaline's pumping and there's a certain amount of skill involved in that. But then if you zap that bottle, and you're worthless on the next bottle, or you're worthless on the next medical call even, or you're worthless the next day, or over your 4-day, then that's a problem. And that's where the fit to retire part starts to come in. That's where the health part starts to come in. And so, you kind of talk about people who do races and they don't train for it, and they complete it, and that's awesome, and that's mental fortitude, and that's like a 5K or something. But then they can't even walk the next day. Well, then, what good are they, kind of a thing. And so if you put it into our job perspective, that's a big deal. So the aerobic side can be huge for that. And even some of the best powerlifters in the world still focus on conditioning, because they want to be conditioned between each max rep that they do on the stage or on the platform. And then they want to not feel out of breath when they get to their deadlift when they squatted 5 hours before that. You know what I mean? So just because we focus on strength, and that's a great point by Evan, doesn't mean that conditioning is any less important. It used to be the only thing, for police, fire, and military. It was just push-ups, pull-ups, and run, right? And we're finally coming around, but we don't want to go too far on the other side of the spectrum and forget that aspect, because there's a health benefit there, there's a recovery benefit there, and honestly, I think there's a little bit of a mental health benefit there of just cleansing the system, cleansing your mind a little bit. And so I think that's really important. Now, the trick of this one, in my opinion, and setting up this session, getting back into our setup, is getting this all in at the station. So one way you can do conditioning and talk to somebody about it is, so there's different ways to set up conditioning, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because we do on the online module. But so there's obviously higher intensity stuff, interval type stuff, right? And then there's long, slow, steady stuff. And I think there's a time and a place for both. Now, obviously at the station, if we were a crew and we were going to do, hey, let's omit this, let's all do a warm up. Okay, our main movement today is squats. We're going to do 5x3 squats with 3 minutes of rest in between. We're all doing that. It takes a little time, right? And then we're going to do some RDLs and some kettlebell swings and then we're going to all get on the treadmill and do 30 minutes. I mean, you see where I'm going with this? Like, there's no way with calls and all of us trying to get it done. It's unrealistic sometimes. So maybe with conditioning, or that's where the benefit of this gray area comes in, is when you're setting up a program for somebody, keep it real, and what we alluded to yesterday is keep it realistic at the station where they're not going to be worthless if they get a call in the middle of their set or whatever. But at the same time, there's a realistic time format there. So maybe let's say the long, slow, steady stuff for off the job. That's great for recovery days as well. Assuming they're not trying to just catch up on sleep or whatever. So that's how you can kind of split up the conditioning. So the conditioning at the station could be relatively short, maybe interval, depending on the recovery ability of the individual. But you could almost focus on this stuff at the station, or you could do more of a strength day at the station. The second day of the set, maybe you focus more on conditioning, and then you repeat that on the 4-day or something like that. So there's a lot of ways to set it up. So before we get into mobility and stretch and the groundwork side of it, let's have everybody have a little bit of input here. Let's set up just an average day, and let's pretend like we're just going to do, we can meld these, but let's just plan a day and try to make it kind of realistic based on how we might want to set this up. So but I'll throw you a bone on this. Let's say we're going to do lower body emphasis for that day. That'll be, because you could do full body, and that's not a problem either. For beginners, a lot of times that's a good way to do it. But again, we're going to set up a workout for the station where maybe time is of the essence and we're trying to get the most bang for our buck with that amount of time. So if we were going to do a lower body based movement, somebody take me through a warm up. Row, anyone? Okay. So row is our general to get us started, right? Okay. What about movement prep? So Rich, let's just have you do the whole warm up. So okay. We're going to row for how long?
We're going to row for 5 minutes.
Okay, sweet. Sounds good to me.
And so with the row, we're warming up with a pull, a little bit of a squat, and hip hinge.
Awesome. Okay.
In the row. And then our movement to warm up our lower body is we're going to do air squats.
Okay. And what are we looking at there for like reps and stuff like that?
Let's do 3 sets of 10 air squats, like low intensity, rest for 3 minutes in between each set.
3 minutes?
What?
3 minute rest in between each set?
Yes. Yeah. So 1 to 3 minutes. Hold them at ground.
Okay.
That's what we're warming up.
Right. So yeah, so you could do that. The only counter I would say to that is now that's extending our warm up quite a bit, and we're trying to make it as efficient as possible. So it depends on the person. And if you're warming up with just air squats, I might do a little less rest, but that's not a big deal.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Okay, and then if you want to address this, and this is kind of user dependent, what does that mean, like warming up the CNS, like Jake kind of referred to? Does anybody know what that means? And there's some different interpretations. So
explosive stuff?
Yeah, in general, Paul, what are you going to input on that?
When he was talking about the band and stuff, that people have issues turning musculature on, you can do some on the band, something to turn specific muscle on, or remind people that this is the muscle that we chronically don't turn on and we need to.
Right.
So they can be specific to the individual or
yeah. So I'm glad they both said those things. That's exactly the two ways that I kind of interpret it. In some ways, this could mean just firing, your neurology essentially. So if you have an issue with somebody always being like this, you're trying to get them to fire their glute. I mean, their glutes are obviously firing, otherwise they wouldn't be standing, but it just means to fire more. Now, sometimes with some people, I'll even do that with an air squat, just at the top of the squat, squeeze the crap out of your glutes and then go down and then look at the movement pattern. But if you need to do the band work or somebody's really has issues with mobility, then yeah, you dive into that, and so do that aspect of CNS. But what Jake said is also true in my opinion, is firing, just getting the system firing and getting your body like woken up in a different way. So we're slowly warming it up, generally, getting maybe a sweat, getting the heart rate up. We're doing a little movement prep. Okay, body, here's what we're about to do. Let's get a full range of motion going here. And then that could maybe look like jump squats, but super chill, right? So it's kind of plyos, it's kind of power, but not really like 70-80% of your max, like going through the full range of motion, leaving the ground, absorbing, catching yourself. So you're adding load at the same time more than you had with an air squat, but you're firing that system and getting it fired up. And that's a very common kind of tool for a lot of strength coaches.
So there's a principle that basically says that as intensity goes up, the more muscle fibers are recruited, right?
Right.
So that's what we're aiming at here.
Right.
Is slowly turning up that intensity because we want to reduce the chance of injury as much as possible to the point that we're recruiting hopefully all of the muscle fibers.
Yep.
But a lot of us, it takes years to get to the point where we
Sure.
have that neuromuscular connection.
Yep. Yep. Perfect. Good point. Okay, so then now this could look like jump squats. And again, very little, like we're talking 2 sets of 3 maybe is all it takes for that person. We've already, we've already hammered this, so we're going to get rid of that. Or
Captain, for that warm-up programming, we essentially need to identify what lower body movement we're doing, right? So
True.
So we
Yeah.
identify what CNS
Yeah, but
specific things we're going to fire.
yeah, that's true. That being said, though, with the exception of maybe these, even if this was a deadlift, I think it could all still apply.
Agreed.
Totally. But yeah, good point. Good point. But yeah, we'll just take the squat though for now. So yeah, if this was a deadlift though, we can't talk about every possibility, but just since you brought that up, how would that change maybe a little? What are you thinking, Anthony?
So for deadlift firing, I'd probably put them in some banded good mornings.
Uh-huh.
You know, just so they're kind of used to the range of motion and it's really light. Or
Right.
it could be unloaded, that way.
Yep.
It's specific to the
Yeah, a little more hingy, a little less squatty, a little less knee flexion. It could be a kettlebell swing for the firing part, the CNS, like power, boom, boom. Kettlebell swing should be fast and explosive, should be, but not always. So yeah, so and then we're not going to talk about every possibility, but if this was the bench, you kind of see where this is going. This is the overhead press, whatever. Well, we're just going to kind of lay out a random day. Okay, so we've already kind of covered this, and I think for most people, we don't really need to talk about that. I don't think this is going to be that applicable, and if it is, then obviously you would do it next, and it would be what it is. But we're kind of jumping into it here with the jump squats. But this could be box jumps or something like that as well prior to a squat. Okay, so now our main movement is what? Let's see who's going to take it.
squat.
Okay, back squat. Okay, that we want to do? Okay. Okay, and what do we want to do for sets and reps?
Like that changes depending on like the week and stuff. But so like if this is week 1 of the whole
Yeah, just a random day. Just staying within our principles that we've talked
I
about.
did 3 by 5.
Okay. Classic model, 3 sets of 5, right? And then how much rest?
2 to 3 minutes.
Okay.
2 to 5 minutes. Sorry.
There you go. Okay, so right now, how deep are we in time-wise, realistically? Like, by the time we finish our strength movement, where are we at?
20 minutes, 30 minutes.
Yeah. So you can see we're kind of getting in there a little bit, and strength works takes a little time. It's worth it, but it takes a little time to do it right. Okay, somebody else. Let's take a person who is needs some hypertrophy work, but they're also maybe could use a little bit of conditioning, and we're at the station. So somebody take let's just combine those two a little bit. How can we set that up based on what our focus is for the day?
Kettlebell squats.
Mm-hmm.
Kettlebell squats.
Okay.
Kettlebell
Like
swings.
a goblet squat.
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody else?
Sled.
Oof.
Not the same.
Sled work. I love it. It's good. So that I think could either go. We could do a couple of accessory movements and kind of superset it with a goblet squat and something else,
Or a front squat.
and then chase it with the sled. Or you can mix it in there. That'd be tough. That'd be tough. What else would go? Maybe if we were just going to do a superset or a triple set with the goblet squat. What's that?
Loaded carries.
Yeah, we could put a carry in there. What else?
Walking lunges.
Yeah, walking lunges would be good. That'd be tough to get back to the goblet squat. How about some kind of hinge though?
Good morning.
For a lower, yeah, like a good morning Romanian deadlift, a kettlebell swing, like we mentioned several times. That might be nice because what's nice there is once you get, I mean, you're already fatigued from this, right? This is kind of chasing that, getting a little hypertrophy, obviously considerably lighter, but really focusing on your range of motion, your quality of your movement, and then to chase that with either one of these two. The quality of your movement could go down significantly depending on the individual, and hopefully it doesn't, but it could. Whereas if you do something that's a little bit more counter, an antagonistic movement, like as we call it, so it maybe not take away as much if you do more of a hinge and chase it, something like that. So, or even something, yeah, or like a carry, something that's non-technical, right? As long as I maintain my posture, I can carry this thing as long as it's not overloaded. That person. That's really good because it gets the heart rate up. Their legs are still moving, but they're not going to go back to the squats and just be dead. You know what I mean? Well, hopefully. And if they are, just need to rest a little bit more and then get that good quality movement. So you can see there's a lot of ways to set that up. And then conditioning, like we've talked about, for some people, maybe that's just let's do a couple of intervals on the bike or on the rower again or whatever. Maybe it's let's just walk on the treadmill for 10 minutes. And just more of a cool down style, and then the next day we'll kind of do some more conditioning or whatever. Now, this example, and then like I said, we'll get into groundwork and mobility, but this example would be just doing your kind of quintessential leg day, right? Now, of course, it doesn't have to be set up that way, and in the online platform, I talk about a whole bunch of ways to set that up. For the beginner, perhaps the best way is like 2 to 3 days a week of full body, in which case, if you do that, it's nice to try to get almost all of these things in every session on some level, but you only pick one for strength, and you pick one for, accessory or hypertrophy or two, and you pick one more for the conditioning side, and then you switch your roles with those particular movements the next time. But like a 2 to 3 day a week plan is great because they get lots of recovery, but when they're getting after it, they can get after it, and that's tried and true throughout a long time of 3 days a week full body. I mean, it works. It would work for all of us in this room as well, even if we went back to it and did it sometimes. I dabble in it at times when I'm done doing other types of splits, and it's awesome. It just takes a little more time per session as you get more trained, but for the beginner that's just going to be doing a couple of sets per exercise, it works really well.
Rob, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Shannon's going to be here in about 25-ish minutes.
Okay.
Or actually, the drop dead time being in the classroom for Shannon is 25 minutes.
Okay. I'll wrap it up and we'll get to the movements. Yep. And then another way, just to touch on a couple ways, would be basically like a push-pull or an upper-lower. So the reason I say this is because what we just set up, let's say that was shift number 1 of the set. So shift number 2 of the set could be the upper body emphasis. So now we're focusing on these two instead of these two, right? But the setup is the same, and you can have at it with all the options of doing that, and then maybe a day off, and then depending on the individual, maybe they do that again. Maybe they're doing more conditioning on the off days or whatever. You can see the possibilities here. And again, unfortunately, there's a lot of them, and it takes a little, as Evan referred to, a little bit of art and science into putting all this together. But that's also a good thing, in my opinion, because you can prioritize it to the individual. So before we move on, is there any questions without getting into too much of the weeds on kind of what we talked about with setting up the session?
Just clarification. So if you're doing full body, would it be fitting different things in, different muscle groups into different parts of?
Exactly. Yeah, good point. So we wouldn't go strength. Okay, we're going to back squat for strength. We're going to deadlift for strength. We're going to bench press for strength, and then we're going to do this, because that would be unrealistic. We maybe would do back squat for strength today. We would do accessory of an RDL for a hinge, and like a dumbbell bench press for our push, and a pull up for a pull, or mix that into a Metcon or something like that, and then we throw in some carries for conditioning, session over. And the next day, or 2 days later, whatever, 3 days later, depending on the person, we deadlift for strength. We do some belt squats for our, deadlift for strength, but for our hinge. We do belt squats for a squat, but it's accessory. And then we do a Metcon of upper body, bodybuilding or whatever. And then you can do sled work for your finisher And then another day you would do bench press. You see where I'm going with this? So it's still full body, but you have a different emphasis on what your strength is versus what your accessory hypertrophy is versus what your conditioning or metabolic conditioning is or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Super simple way to do it. And again, that goes back to Dan John. If all your workouts, if you're doing that style, if all your workouts have some aspect of this, you're probably going to be right on. And as long as it's structurally and functionally balanced, as these guys were referring to yesterday. But if you split it, just make sure again that there's a balance, and then you split it. And sometimes the reason you split it is because time is of the essence, typically. So, any other questions? That's a good question. Okay, so let's talk about, we're not going to get into all mobility as a whole, but this is another big component, and Evan wanted me to talk about it because I did a lot in recruit school with the recruits, and I think it's often overlooked. So you could call it, I can refer to it as mobility work for a lot of people, and it will help your mobility, but it's also a stability factor, which I think is just as important. But groundwork, I think, is really important for structural firefighters because of the positioning we have to get in. And kind of like Anthony talked about, I think if you do groundwork in your gear, it's really awesome. And then you're not getting so beat up either. Like you're not squatting in your gear and stuff. You're doing the other stuff, and then you get in your gear to do some mobility work. It'd be really, really good too. And you'll get a sweat going and everything. But groundwork could look like Turkish get-ups. It could look like different mobility work that you see on MWAD or ROMWAD or all these other things. Or what I'm going to talk about today are doing animal movements, crawls and things like that. Because I think, and what's great about these is you can mix this into your warm-up, and that could take the place of this and perhaps even this, depending on what your focus is that day. Or it could go that down here and kind of encompass almost all of these, depending on the person. Because you do a couple animal movements in a row with relatively minimal rest. I mean, we've had some absolute beasts in this room, and they were like panting and crying after a little animal walk. And it doesn't take much time, Jade. I mean, what do we do? Sometimes we go, hey, we got 5 minutes, and I want time to stretch, but I want to get your heart rates up, and I want to do some mobility. Throw together some animal movements, and you're toast in 5 minutes. So let's talk about some of those movements, and let's actually